After 42 years of teaching kindergarten, I thought my golden years would finally be golden. I had saved every penny, planned every detail, and dreamed of quiet mornings with my garden and peaceful evenings reading by the fireplace. But what my twin daughters did 3 weeks into my retirement didn't just shock me. It destroyed everything I believed about motherhood, family, and the children I had sacrificed my entire life to raise. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I'm Eleanor Hartwell, and at 65, I had just finished my last day at Maplewood Elementary School in Cedar Falls, Oregon. The faculty threw me a beautiful retirement party, complete with a photo collage of 4 decades of kindergartners whose lives I had touched. My principal, Mrs. Chen, gave a speech about how I had been the heart and soul of the school, how parents specifically requested their children be placed in my classroom. I felt proud, accomplished, ready for the next chapter. My twin daughters, Jessica and Amanda, had seemed so supportive during my final weeks of work. Jessica, 38, worked as a marketing director for a Portland advertising firm, while Amanda had built a successful real estate business in nearby Salem. Both were married with children of their own, and I had always been the grandmother who never missed a soccer game, dance recital, or birthday party. I thought we had the kind of close-knit family that everyone envied. The retirement party was held on a Friday evening in June, and both girls were there with their families. Jessica's husband, Michael, made a toast about how I deserved all the rest and relaxation in the world. Amanda's husband, David, joked about how I would finally have time to spoil my 5 grandchildren even more than I already did. We laughed, we hugged, and I went to bed that night feeling like the luckiest woman alive. My retirement savings weren't extravagant, but they were sufficient. 42 years of teacher contributions to the Oregon Public Employees Retirement System, plus my own careful investments and the modest life insurance payout from my late husband Robert, meant I could live comfortably. I owned my 3-bedroom craftsman home outright, had a reliable car, and enough saved to take the occasional trip or spoil my grandchildren. I wasn't wealthy, but I was secure. The first week of retirement felt like a vacation. I slept in until 7 instead of my usual 5:30 alarm. I tended to my rose garden without rushing to get ready for work. I started reading mystery novels again, something I hadn't had time for in years. I even took a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but never had the opportunity. Jessica called every few days to check in, asking how I was adjusting to retirement life. "Mom, are you getting bored yet?" she would ask with a laugh. "You were always so busy with school. I hope you're finding things to keep yourself occupied." Amanda would stop by on weekends with her youngest daughter, Emma, who loved helping me water the flowers. Everything seemed perfectly normal, loving, and supportive. But on the 3rd Monday of my retirement, things began to shift in ways so subtle I almost missed them. Jessica called during what used to be my lunch break at school, around 11:30 in the morning. "Mom," she said, her voice carrying a tone I hadn't heard before. "Michael and I were talking, and we're a little concerned about you living in that big house all by yourself." I was surprised by the comment. My house wasn't particularly large, and I had lived there for 23 years, even after Robert's passing 5 years earlier. "Concerned about what, sweetheart?" I asked, setting down the watering can I'd been using in my greenhouse. "Well, you're getting older, and that house requires a lot of maintenance. The roof, the plumbing, the yard work. We just think it might be too much for someone your age to handle alone." She paused, and I could hear traffic in the background, suggesting she was calling from her car. "Have you thought about maybe downsizing? Maybe moving into one of those nice senior communities?" The suggestion caught me completely off guard. I was 65, not 95. I was in excellent health, had been taking care of the house just fine, and felt more energetic than I had in years now that I wasn't dealing with the daily stress of managing a classroom full of 5-year-olds. Jessica, I appreciate your concern, but I love this house. Your father and I built so many memories here. This is where you and Amanda grew up. I'm not ready to leave. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Okay, Mom. I just want you to think about it. Maybe we could look at some places together just to see what's out there. You might be surprised at how nice some of these communities are. After we hung up, I stood in my kitchen looking around at the warm yellow walls Robert and I had painted together 15 years earlier, at the family photos covering the refrigerator, at the ceramic handprints Jessica and Amanda had made in my art class when they were 6 years old. The idea of leaving felt not just unnecessary, but almost offensive. This was my sanctuary, my haven, the place where I planned to spend my golden years. 2 days later, Amanda arrived unannounced around dinner time. This wasn't unusual. My daughters had always felt comfortable dropping by without calling first. But when I opened the door, she wasn't carrying Emma or wearing her usual cheerful smile. Instead, she looked serious, almost businesslike. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, walking past me into the living room without her usual hug or kiss on the cheek. She sat down on the edge of my favorite reading chair, the one where I'd spent countless evenings grading papers and preparing lesson plans. "Of course, honey. Is everything okay? You seem upset." I settled onto the couch across from her, noting how she avoided making direct eye contact. "I've been talking to Jessica, and we're both really worried about your financial situation." She pulled out her phone and opened what appeared to be a notes app. "Mom, do you realize how much money you're going to be spending just to maintain this house now that you're on a fixed income? Property taxes, utilities, maintenance, repairs. And what about healthcare costs as you get older?" Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I felt a flutter of confusion in my chest. "Amanda, I've done the math very carefully. I have my pension, my Social Security, and my savings. I'm not going to be wealthy, but I'll be fine. I've been planning this retirement for years." She shook her head, her expression becoming more intense. "But Mom, you're not thinking about emergencies. What if you need expensive medical care? What if the roof needs to be replaced? What if the furnace breaks down? You could burn through your savings in a few years, and then what?" Her questions felt aggressive, almost accusatory, as if I were some naive child who couldn't manage my own finances. I had been handling money responsibly my entire adult life, had raised 2 daughters largely on my own after Robert's early retirement due to health issues, and had managed to save a respectable nest egg despite working in education, which was hardly a high-paying field. "Amanda, I appreciate your concern, but I've planned very carefully for retirement. I have insurance, I have emergency savings, and I have a financial advisor who's helped me prepare for exactly these kinds of situations." I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could feel irritation creeping in. "Why are you suddenly so worried? About my finances?" She finally looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that I couldn't quite identify. "Because Jessica and I care about you, and we don't want to see you struggle. We think it would be smart for you to sell this house while the market is good and move somewhere more affordable. You could probably clear $300,000 after paying off the mortgage, and that money could last you much longer if you're not dealing with all the expenses of homeownership." The conversation was moving in a direction that made me deeply uncomfortable. My daughters had never shown much interest in my financial planning before, and suddenly they seemed to have very specific ideas about what I should do with my money and my property. "Girls, I'm not interested in selling my house. This is my home. This is where I want to spend my retirement." Amanda's expression hardened slightly. "Mom, I'm trying to help you make smart decisions. Jessica and I have both done well for ourselves. And we understand investments and financial planning better than you do. We're not suggesting this to hurt you. We're suggesting it because we love you and want to see you secure." The implication that I didn't understand financial planning, despite having successfully managed money for decades and worked with financial advisors throughout my career, felt insulting. More than that, it felt like she was treating me as if I were incompetent, as if reaching retirement age had somehow made me incapable of making rational decisions about my own life. "Amanda, I need you to stop. I'm not selling my house, I'm not moving to a senior community, and I'm not interested in having this conversation anymore." I stood up, hoping to signal that the discussion was over, but instead of apologizing or backing down, Amanda's tone became sharper. "Fine, Mom, but don't come to us when you run out of money and need help. Don't expect Jessica and me to bail you out when you can't afford your expenses anymore." The words hit me like a slap. In all my years of parenting, through all the challenges of raising teenagers and supporting them through college and early adulthood, my daughters had never spoken to me with such coldness, such calculated cruelty. I had never asked them for financial help, had never been a burden to them, had in fact continued to give them gifts and help with their children even after Robert's death reduced my income. "Amanda Marie, I have never asked you or your sister for money, and I don't plan to start now. I think you should leave." My voice was shaking, but I managed to keep it steady. She gathered her purse and phone, but before walking to the door, she turned back to me. "We're just trying to help you face reality, Mom. You're not as young as you used to be, and you're not as capable of handling everything on your own as you think you are." After she left, I sat in my living room feeling shell-shocked. The daughter who used to curl up next to me on this same couch to watch Disney movies, who had called me crying after every college breakup, who had asked me to be in the delivery room when Emma was born, had just spoken to me as if I were a foolish old woman who couldn't be trusted to manage her own life. That night I called my sister Margaret, who lived in Phoenix with her husband. We had always been close, talking every week since we were children. I told her about the conversations with both daughters, about their sudden intense interest in my living situation and finances. "Ellie," Margaret said, using the nickname she'd called me since childhood, "that doesn't sound like concern. That sounds like something else entirely. Have either of them mentioned needing money for anything? Any financial problems?" I thought about it. Jessica had mentioned a few months earlier that business at her advertising firm had been slower than usual, and Amanda had complained about the real estate market being unpredictable. But neither had directly asked for help, and both seemed to be living comfortably in their large suburban homes with new cars and regular family vacations. "Not directly," I told Margaret, "but now that you mention it, there have been little comments here and there. Nothing that seemed significant at the time. Ellie, I hate to say this, but it sounds like your girls might be looking at your house and your savings as their inheritance, and they want to get their hands on it sooner rather than later." Margaret's voice was gentle but direct. "You need to be very careful. Don't sign anything. Don't make any major financial decisions without talking to a lawyer first." The possibility that my daughters might be motivated by greed rather than genuine concern for my welfare was so disturbing that I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every tone of voice, every suggestion they had made. Were they really worried about my ability to care for myself? Or were they worried that I might spend their inheritance on myself during my retirement years? The next morning, Jessica called again. This time, her approach was different, softer, more emotional. "Mom, I hope you're not upset about Amanda's visit yesterday. We really are just worried about you. It's hard for us to see you all alone in that big house. We miss Dad too, and we know how much that house means to you because of all the memories. But maybe it's time to make some new memories somewhere else." The mention of Robert felt manipulative, as if she were using my grief over my husband's death to convince me to make decisions I didn't want to make. "Jessica, I understand that You're concerned, but I need you and your sister to trust that I'm capable of making my own decisions about my life. I'm not an invalid, I'm not senile, and I'm not financially irresponsible. Of course not, Mom. We know you're smart and capable, but sometimes people who are too close to a situation can't see it clearly. Maybe you should talk to someone objective, like a financial planner or even a real estate agent, just to get some outside perspective. I realized that no matter what I said, Jessica was going to continue pushing her agenda. Jessica, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to listen carefully. I am not selling my house. I am not moving to a senior community. I am not interested in anyone's outside perspective on my financial situation except my own financial advisor, whom I've been working with for 15 years. This conversation is over. There was a long silence, and when Jessica spoke again, her voice had lost all its warmth. Okay, Mom, I hope you don't regret this decision. After I hung up, I realized that both conversations had ended with what felt like veiled threats. Amanda had essentially said not to expect help if I ran into financial trouble, and Jessica had expressed hope that I wouldn't regret my decision to maintain my independence. These weren't the voices of concerned daughters. They were the voices of people who were angry that I wasn't cooperating with their plans. That afternoon, I decided to take a drive through the neighborhood where I had lived for more than 2 decades. I wanted to clear my head and remind myself why I loved this area so much. The tree-lined streets, the well-maintained older homes, the sense of community and history. This was where I belonged. As I drove past the elementary school where I had worked, past the coffee shop where Robert and I used to meet for lunch on Saturdays, past the park where I had pushed Jessica and Amanda on swings when they were small, I felt a renewed sense of determination. This was my life, my home, my retirement. I had worked 42 years to earn the right to spend my golden years exactly as I chose. If my daughters couldn't respect that, if they were more interested in my assets than my happiness, then that was their problem, not mine. I wasn't going to let anyone, not even my own children, manipulate me into giving up the life I had worked so hard to build. But as I pulled into my driveway and saw Amanda's car parked on the street, I realized that my daughters weren't giving up either. Whatever was motivating their sudden interest in my living situation and finances, they were prepared to keep pushing until they got what they wanted. The question was, what exactly did they want, and how far were they willing to go to get it? Amanda was standing at my front door with an envelope in her hands and a man in a business suit beside her. The sight made my stomach drop, but I forced myself to maintain composure as I opened the door. "Mom, this is Richard Blackwood from Cascade Financial Group," Amanda said, her voice artificially bright. "I asked him to come over and give you some professional advice about your retirement planning." The man extended his hand with a practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Hartwell, I've heard wonderful things about you from Amanda. I specialize in helping retirees maximize their financial security, and I'd love to discuss some opportunities that could significantly improve your situation." I didn't invite them in, instead standing firmly in my doorway. "Mr. Blackwood, I appreciate you coming by, but I didn't request a consultation. I already have a financial advisor, whom I trust completely." Amanda stepped forward, her expression becoming more insistent. "Mom, Richard has some ideas that your current advisor probably hasn't considered. The financial landscape has changed dramatically in recent years. Wouldn't you at least want to hear what he has to say?" Something about the entire setup felt orchestrated, manipulative. Why would Amanda bring a financial advisor to my home without asking permission? Why was she so determined to involve outside parties in my personal financial affairs? "Amanda, I need to speak with you privately. Mr. Blackwood, thank you for your time, but I'm not interested in changing my financial arrangements." The man's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming less friendly and more businesslike. "Mrs. Hartwell, I understand that change can be intimidating, especially for people in your age group. But Amanda has shared some concerns about your current financial strategy that I think you should take seriously. Sometimes an outside perspective can help identify risks that aren't immediately apparent. His condescending tone, particularly the phrase, "people in your age group," ignited a spark of anger in my chest. I had been managing money longer than this man had probably been alive, and I certainly didn't need lectures about intimidation or risk assessment. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm going to ask you to leave my property now. Amanda, we'll talk later." After he left, Amanda followed me into my living room, her facade of concern dropping entirely. "Mom, you're being incredibly stubborn about this. Richard works with the same investment firm that manages our retirement accounts. He could potentially save you thousands of dollars in fees and get you much better returns on your investments." I turned to face my daughter, seeing her clearly for perhaps the first time in weeks. "Amanda, why are you so invested in my financial affairs? You've never shown this much interest in my money management before. What's really going on here?" She sat down heavily on my couch, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something that might have been guilt cross her face. "David and I have been talking about expanding the real estate business. There's an opportunity to buy a commercial property that could triple our income within 5 years, but we need additional capital for the down payment." Finally, the truth was beginning to emerge. "And you think I should provide that capital?" "Not give it to us, Mom. Invest it with us. You'd be a partner in the business. Instead of your money sitting in conservative investments earning minimal returns, you could be part of something that generates real wealth." Her voice became more animated, more persuasive. "Think about what that could mean for your grandchildren's college funds, for your own financial security." The proposal was dressed up in language about partnership and mutual benefit, but what she was really asking was for me to risk my retirement savings on her business ventures. "Amanda, real estate investment is speculative. What happens if the market changes? What happens if the business doesn't perform as expected? What happens to my retirement security if your commercial property investment fails?" She waved away my concerns with a dismissive gesture. "Mom, David and I know the real estate market better than almost anyone in this area. This isn't speculation. It's a calculated investment based on years of experience and market analysis. The risk is minimal, and the potential returns are enormous." But I had seen enough economic downturns, had witnessed enough people lose their savings in sure-thing investments to know that there was no such thing as minimal risk when it came to real estate speculation. More importantly, I was beginning to understand that my daughters weren't just concerned about my financial welfare. They were concerned about gaining access to my financial resources for their own purposes. "Amanda, I'm not interested in becoming a business partner with you and David. My retirement savings are meant to provide security and stability for my golden years, not to fund other people's business ventures, even if those people are my own children." Her expression hardened, and I saw a coldness in her eyes that reminded me of the way she had looked as a teenager when she didn't get her way. "Fine, Mom, but don't come crying to us when you're 75 and running out of money because you were too conservative with your investments. Don't expect us to support you when your safe little nest egg isn't enough to cover your expenses anymore." The threat was clear and cruel. If I didn't agree to invest my money in their business, they would withdraw their support when I might actually need help in the future. The emotional manipulation was breathtaking in its calculated meanness. After Amanda left, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, trying to process what had just happened. My daughters weren't just suggesting that I change my living situation or my financial management. They were actively trying to gain control over my assets for their own benefit. The realization was devastating, but it was also clarifying. That evening, I called my financial advisor, Patricia Morrison, whom I had worked with for 15 years. Patricia had helped me navigate the financial challenges of Robert's illness and death, had guided me through the complexities of retirement planning, and had always been honest and transparent about risks and opportunities. "Eleanor, it's wonderful to hear from you. How are you enjoying retirement? Patricia's warm voice was exactly what I needed after the emotional turmoil of the day. Patricia, I need your honest assessment of my financial situation. Are there any red flags in my planning? Any areas where I should be concerned about my long-term security? I described the conversations with my daughters, their suggestions about selling my house and changing my investment strategy. Patricia was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing, presumably pulling up my financial records. Eleanor, I've reviewed your portfolio recently, and your retirement planning is actually quite solid. Your pension and Social Security provide a stable foundation. Your investments are appropriately diversified for your age and risk tolerance, and your emergency savings are adequate for unexpected expenses. You're in better financial shape than many people your age. Her assessment contradicted everything my daughters had been telling me about my supposed financial vulnerability. So there's no urgent need for me to make major changes to my living situation or investment strategy? Absolutely not. The only scenario where I would recommend significant changes would be if your health situation changed dramatically, or if you decided you wanted to take on more or less investment risk based on your personal preferences. But from a financial planning perspective, you're doing everything right. Patricia's professional confirmation of what I had believed all along gave me the confidence to trust my own judgment. My daughter's urgent concerns about my financial security weren't based on any real financial problems. They were based on their own desire to access my assets for their personal benefit. The next morning, Jessica called, but this time her approach was different. Instead of the pseudo-concern I had been hearing, her voice carried a note of frustration that she wasn't trying to hide. Mom, Amanda told me about your conversation yesterday. I can't believe you turned down an opportunity to increase your investment returns just because you're afraid of change. Do you realize how much money you could be leaving on the table? The accusation that I was motivated by fear rather than prudence was insulting, but more than that, it revealed how little my daughters understood or respected my decision-making process. Jessica, I'm not afraid of change. I'm being responsible. With my retirement security. There's a difference between being conservative and being fearful. But Mom, conservative investing is fine when you're young and have time to recover from market fluctuations. At your age, you need to be thinking about maximizing your returns while you still can. Every year you wait is a year of lost opportunity. Her argument might have been convincing if I hadn't just spoken with Patricia, who had explained that for someone in my situation, with my timeline and my risk tolerance, conservative investing was exactly the right strategy. Jessica was using financial terms and concepts, but she was using them incorrectly, either because she didn't understand them or because she was deliberately trying to mislead me. Jessica, I've discussed my investment strategy with my financial advisor, and she confirms that my current approach is appropriate for my situation. I'm not going to change my entire financial plan based on suggestions from people who aren't qualified to give me financial advice. The silence on the other end of the line was telling. When Jessica spoke again, her voice had lost all pretense of sweetness. People who aren't qualified? Mom, I have an MBA from Portland State. I work in business. I understand finance and investments better than some small-town financial advisor who probably hasn't seen real wealth management in her entire career. The attack on Patricia, who had helped me navigate complex financial decisions for years and had always acted in my best interest, was particularly offensive. But more than that, Jessica's comment revealed her true attitude toward me and my choices. She didn't see me as someone capable of making informed decisions with qualified professional help. She saw me as someone who needed to be managed by people she considered more sophisticated and knowledgeable. Jessica, this conversation is over. I'm not going to listen to you disparage my financial advisor or question my competence to manage my own affairs. I've been handling money responsibly since before you were born, and I'm not going to stop now. But Jessica wasn't finished. Mom, I'm trying to help you understand that the world has changed. The financial strategies that worked when you were younger don't work anymore. If you're not willing to adapt, you're going to end up struggling. And when that happens, don't expect Amanda and me to bail you out. Again, the threat was clear. Cooperate with their plans or face the consequences alone. The pattern was becoming unmistakable. My daughters were using the threat of withdrawing their love and support as leverage to try to control my decisions. After hanging up, I realized that I needed to take proactive steps to protect myself. If my daughters were determined to pressure me into making financial decisions that served their interests rather than mine, I needed to create boundaries and safeguards that would prevent them from succeeding. I spent the afternoon researching elder law attorneys in the Salem area. I wanted to understand my rights, to make sure my estate planning documents were current and properly structured, and to explore what legal protections might be available if my daughters continued to escalate their pressure tactics. The attorney I selected, Maria Santos, specialized in protecting seniors from financial exploitation, including exploitation by family members. When I called her office and explained my situation in general terms, she immediately understood the seriousness of the situation. Mrs. Hartwell, what you're describing is unfortunately quite common. Adult children who view their parents' assets as their own inheritance sometimes become aggressive about trying to control those assets before their parents die. The good news is that you recognize what's happening and you're taking steps to protect yourself. We scheduled an appointment for the following week, and Maria advised me to begin documenting any further attempts by my daughters to pressure me into making financial decisions. Keep notes about what they say, when they say it, and who else might be present. If this escalates to the point where legal intervention becomes necessary, you'll want to have a clear record of their behavior. The idea that I might need legal protection from my own children was heartbreaking, but it was also empowering. I wasn't helpless, I wasn't at their mercy, and I didn't have to accept their manipulation just because they were family. That weekend, both daughters arrived at my house together, unannounced and uninvited. When I opened the door, they walked past me without waiting for permission to enter, settling themselves in my living room as if they owned the place. "Mom, we need to have a serious family meeting," Jessica announced, pulling out a manila folder. "We've been talking, and we think it's time for some tough love about your situation." Amanda nodded in agreement. "We've been trying to be gentle and supportive, but you're not listening to reason. We're worried that if we don't intervene now, you're going to make decisions that you'll regret later." The language of intervention, as if I were struggling with addiction or mental illness rather than simply disagreeing with their suggestions, was particularly manipulative. But I was prepared for this conversation now, armed with professional advice and a clear understanding of what was really happening. "Girls, before you say anything else, I want you to understand something clearly. I am not going to sell my house. I am not going to change my investment strategy. I am not going to become a partner in your business ventures. These are final decisions, and no amount of pressure or manipulation is going to change my mind." Jessica opened her folder and pulled out several sheets of paper. "Mom, we've done some research, and we think you need to see the facts about your financial situation." She spread the papers on my coffee table, revealing what appeared to be printouts from real estate websites showing home values in my neighborhood, along with calculations about potential investment returns and cost of living projections. The sight of my daughters researching my property values and creating financial projections without my knowledge or permission was deeply unsettling. It suggested a level of planning and coordination that went far beyond casual concern for my welfare. "How did you get this information about my house?" I asked, looking at the detailed property assessment that included information that should have been private. Amanda and Jessica exchanged a glance that confirmed my suspicion that they had been working together on this for some time. "Mom, this is all public information. We're just trying to help you see the big picture. But the Big picture they were presenting wasn't about my financial security. It was about the potential value they could extract from my assets. Their calculations focused on how much money could be generated from selling my house and investing my savings in higher-risk ventures, not on how I could maintain my current lifestyle and security throughout my retirement years. "I want both of you to leave," I said quietly. "And I want you to understand that these ambush visits need to stop. If you want to talk to me about anything, you need to call first and ask permission to come over. This is my home, and I will not tolerate being treated like a problem that needs to be solved rather than a person who deserves respect." Jessica's expression became angry, almost vindictive. "Fine, Mom, but when you're sitting alone in this house in 10 years, struggling to pay your bills, remember that we tried to help you. Remember that you chose pride over practicality." As they gathered their papers and prepared to leave, Amanda delivered her own parting shot. "You know, Mom, we've always looked up to you. You taught us to be independent and strong, but independence means being willing to make hard decisions and accept help when you need it. We're disappointed that you can't see that we're trying to help you succeed." The attempt to reframe their manipulation as a continuation of the values I had taught them was perhaps the most hurtful part of the entire conversation. They were using my own words, my own principles, as weapons against me. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by the silence of my own home, finally understanding the full scope of what I was facing. My daughters weren't just suggesting changes to my retirement plans. They were mounting a coordinated campaign to convince me that I was incompetent to manage my own life, that my decisions were wrong, and that their control over my assets was necessary for my own good. But they had underestimated me. I had spent 4 decades teaching children, which meant I had 4 decades of experience recognizing manipulation, addressing behavioral problems, and maintaining boundaries with people who tested limits. I had raised 2 daughters as a largely single parent after Robert's health declined, which meant I had experience making difficult decisions under pressure and standing firm when others tried to undermine my authority. Most importantly, I had built a life of independence and self-sufficiency that I wasn't going to abandon just because my own children had decided they knew better than I did about how I should live. That evening, I called my sister Margaret and told her everything that had happened. Margaret listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Ellie," she finally said, "I think you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that this is going to get worse before it gets better. If Jessica and Amanda are as determined as they seem to be, and if they really believe they're entitled to control your money, they're not going to give up just because you've said no." Margaret was right, and I knew it. But I also knew that I had resources, allies, and legal protections that my daughters probably didn't expect me to use. I wasn't the helpless elderly woman they seemed to think I was. I was a strong, intelligent person who had successfully navigated decades of challenges and wasn't about to be defeated by the greed and manipulation of her own children. The battle for my independence and my financial security was just beginning, but I was ready to fight. The meeting with Maria Santos, the elder law attorney, opened my eyes to realities I hadn't even considered. Her office was warm and professional, filled with certificates and awards that spoke to her expertise in protecting seniors from financial exploitation. As I sat across from her mahogany desk, I felt both vulnerable and empowered. Vulnerable because I was admitting that my own children might be trying to exploit me, but empowered because I was taking action to protect myself. "Mrs. Hartwell, based on what you've told me, your daughters are exhibiting classic signs of what we call inheritance impatience," Maria explained, her voice both compassionate and authoritative. "They're not waiting for you to die to claim what they consider their inheritance. They're trying to access it now while you're still alive." She pulled out a legal pad and began sketching a timeline. "The pressure to sell your home, the introduction of financial advisors who would benefit from managing your assets, the business partnership proposals. These are all strategies designed to separate you from your financial resources under the guise of helping you." The clinical description of my daughter's behavior was both illuminating and heartbreaking. Is there anything I can do legally to protect myself? Maria nodded confidently. Absolutely. First, we need to update your estate planning documents to ensure they're ironclad. Second, we can establish additional safeguards like requiring multiple parties to approve any major financial decisions. Third, if their behavior escalates, we can explore restraining orders or other legal protections. She handed me a folder of documents. I also want you to start keeping a detailed journal of every interaction you have with Jessica and Amanda. Date, time, what was said, who else was present. If this situation deteriorates further, documentation will be crucial. Leaving Maria's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. Hope. I wasn't powerless, and I wasn't alone. There were legal protections available, and I had the right to use them. That afternoon, I decided to take a different approach to reclaiming my sense of purpose and joy. Instead of waiting for my daughters to make their next move, I would focus on building the retirement life I actually wanted. I drove to the Maplewood Elementary School where I had spent 4 decades of my career. The current principal, Mrs. Chen, greeted me with a warm smile. Eleanor, how wonderful to see you. How are you enjoying retirement? It's been an adjustment, I admitted. Actually, I was wondering if there might be any volunteer opportunities here. I miss working with children, and I'd love to stay connected to the school community. Mrs. Chen's eyes lit up. Are you kidding? We would love to have you back in any capacity. We have a new reading support program that could use someone with your experience, and the kindergarten teachers have been struggling with some of the more challenging students. They keep saying they wish they could ask Eleanor Hartwell for advice. Within an hour, I had agreed to volunteer 3 mornings a week, helping struggling readers and mentoring new teachers. As I walked through the familiar hallways, smelling the combination of crayons and cleaning supplies that had been the backdrop of my professional life, I felt a surge of energy and purpose that I hadn't experienced since retirement began. But my newfound sense of direction was interrupted by an unexpected phone call that evening. It was David, Amanda's husband, and his tone was apologetic but urgent. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me calling directly, but I wanted to talk to you about what's been happening with Amanda and Jessica. I think you should know that this whole thing isn't really about concern for your welfare. My heart raced. David had always been the more reasonable of my sons-in-law, but he had never contradicted Amanda or gotten involved in family disputes. What do you mean, David? Amanda's real estate business is in trouble. We overextended ourselves buying properties when the market was high, and now we're facing some serious financial pressure. The commercial property opportunity she mentioned. To you? It's not an investment opportunity. It's a desperate attempt to generate enough cash flow to avoid bankruptcy. The confession hit me like a physical blow. Are you saying that Amanda lied to me about the business opportunity? She didn't exactly lie, but she didn't tell you the whole truth either. If we don't come up with a significant amount of capital, in the next 6 months, we could lose everything. Our house, the business, our kids' college savings. David's voice cracked slightly. Amanda convinced herself that if you invested with us, she'd be saving both your financial future and ours. And Jessica? Is she having financial problems too? David was quiet for a moment. Michael got laid off from his job 3 months ago. They've been keeping it quiet, trying to maintain appearances, but their savings are running out. Jessica heard about Amanda's plan to approach you for investment capital, and she decided she wanted in on it. The revelation that both of my daughters were facing serious financial difficulties explained so much about their recent behavior, but it also made their manipulation even more devastating. Instead of coming to me honestly and asking for help, they had chosen to try to trick me into risking my retirement security for their benefit. David, why are you telling me this? Because I love Amanda, but what she's doing to you is wrong. You worked your entire life to earn your retirement security, and you shouldn't have to risk it to bail us out of our poor financial decisions. He paused, and I could hear the emotion in his voice. Also because I think you should know that they're not planning to give up. Amanda's talked about bringing in lawyers, claiming that you're not mentally competent to make your own financial decisions. The threat of a legal challenge to my mental competency was terrifying. I had read news stories about elderly people being declared incompetent by family members who wanted to control their assets, and I knew that such legal proceedings could be devastating even if they were ultimately unsuccessful. David, thank you for warning me. I know this must be difficult for you. Eleanor, you've always been good to me and to our children. Amanda's under enormous stress, and she's not thinking clearly, but that doesn't make what she's planning to do to you acceptable. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen feeling a mixture of sadness and determination. My daughters weren't just greedy, they were desperate. Desperation could make people do terrible things, even to people they loved. But desperation could also be fought with strength, planning, and the courage to stand up for what was right. The next morning, I called Maria Santos and told her about David's warning. She listened carefully, taking notes, and her response was immediate and decisive. Mrs. Hartwell, we need to move quickly. If your daughters are considering a competency challenge, we need to get ahead of that possibility. She scheduled an emergency appointment for that afternoon. I'm going to recommend that you undergo a comprehensive cognitive assessment by a geriatric psychiatrist. If they try to claim you're not mentally competent, we'll have recent professional documentation proving otherwise. The competency evaluation took place 2 days later at the office of Dr. Sarah Richardson, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in assessing cognitive function in older adults. The 3-hour evaluation included memory tests, problem-solving exercises, psychological assessments, and detailed interviews about my daily functioning and decision-making abilities. Dr. Richardson's conclusion was unambiguous. Mrs. Hartwell, your cognitive function is excellent for someone of any age, let alone someone in her mid-60s. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning abilities are strong, and your decision-making processes are entirely rational and appropriate. There is absolutely no evidence of any cognitive impairment that would affect your ability to manage your own affairs. Armed with this professional assessment, I felt more confident about facing whatever my daughters might try next. But I also decided it was time to take some proactive steps to protect not just my finances, but my emotional well-being. I had been letting my daughter's manipulation isolate me from my friends and social connections. Every conversation had become about their demands and my resistance, leaving no room for the relationships and activities that brought me joy. It was time to change that pattern. I called my friend Helen, a fellow retired teacher who had been asking me to join her book club for months. Helen, is that invitation to join your reading group still open? Eleanor, of course it is. We meet every Thursday evening at the community center. This month we're reading The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. You'll love the group. It's mostly retired professional women who aren't interested in talking about their grandchildren's soccer games all evening. I laughed for the first time in weeks. That sounds perfect. That Thursday evening, I walked into the community center feeling nervous but hopeful. The book club consisted of 12 women, most of them in their 60s and 70s, representing a variety of professional backgrounds: teachers, nurses, social workers, small business owners, and one retired federal judge named Catherine Morrison. As we discussed the novel, I found myself relaxing into the intellectual stimulation and social connection I had been missing. These were women who had built careers, raised families, faced challenges, and created meaningful retirement lives. They reminded me of who I was beyond the role of mother and grandmother. After the formal discussion ended, Catherine approached me. Eleanor, Helen mentioned that you recently retired from teaching. How are you finding the adjustment? Something about Catherine's direct, professional manner made me feel comfortable sharing more than I had planned. It's been challenging in ways I didn't expect. I'm discovering that some people have strong opinions about how I should live my retirement, and those opinions don't always align with my own preferences. Catherine nodded knowingly. Family members who think they know what's best for us? Exactly. I dealt with something similar when I retired from the bench 5 years ago. My son was convinced that I was too old to live alone, too fragile to make my own decisions. It took some firm boundary setting to help him understand that retirement doesn't mean incompetence. After the meeting, Catherine walked me to my car. Eleanor, if you ever need to talk to someone who understands the challenges of maintaining independence in the face of well-meaning but misguided family pressure, please don't hesitate to call me. Driving home that evening, I realized that I had been allowing my daughter's manipulation to define my entire retirement experience. I had been so focused on resisting their demands that I had forgotten to pursue my own dreams and interests. The book club had reminded me that there was a whole world of possibilities available to me: friendships, intellectual pursuits, volunteer work, creative projects. The next morning, I enrolled in a watercolor painting class at the local community college, something I had always wanted to try but never had time for during my teaching career. I also contacted the local literacy council about volunteering as a reading tutor for adults learning English as a second language. For the first time since retirement began, I started each day with excitement about my own plans rather than anxiety, about what demands my daughters might make. The shift in perspective was transformative. Instead of feeling defensive and embattled, I felt empowered and purposeful. But my daughters weren't finished with their campaign. 2 weeks after my conversation with David, I received a certified letter from a law firm in Portland. The letter, signed by an attorney named Jonathan Hayes, requested that I meet with him to discuss concerns that have been raised about your current living situation and financial management. The language was carefully neutral, but the implication was clear. My daughters had escalated their pressure campaign to include legal threats. I called Maria Santos immediately. Mrs. Hartwell, this is exactly what we've been preparing for, Maria said after I read her the letter. Don't respond to this attorney directly. I'll handle all communication with him. This is likely an intimidation tactic designed to pressure you into compliance. Maria's response to Jonathan Hayes was swift and decisive. She sent a letter stating that I was represented by counsel, that I was mentally competent and capable of making my own decisions, and that any further attempts to pressure or intimidate me would be considered harassment. But the letter had achieved its intended effect. It had made me realize that my daughters were serious about using legal pressure to try to control my decisions. The knowledge that they were willing to involve attorneys in their campaign to access my assets was both heartbreaking and infuriating. That evening, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible just weeks earlier. I called both Jessica and Amanda and asked them to meet me at my house for what I described as a final conversation about our relationship. When they arrived the next afternoon, I was prepared. I had notes, I had documentation, and I had clarity about what I needed to say. Girls, I want you to sit down and listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. I looked at each of them in turn, noting the defensive expressions on their faces. I know about your financial problems. I know that Amanda's business is failing and that Michael has lost his job. I know that your concern for my welfare is actually concern for access to my assets. Jessica started to protest, but I held up my hand. I'm not finished. I also know that you've contacted lawyers about challenging my mental competency, and I want you to understand that I've taken steps to protect myself legally. I pulled out Dr. Richardson's cognitive assessment report. I've been evaluated by a geriatric psychiatrist who has confirmed that I am mentally competent and fully capable of making my own decisions. I've also consulted with an elder law attorney who is prepared to defend my rights if necessary. Amanda's face had gone pale. Mom, we never said anything about challenging your competency. We just want to make sure you're protected. Protected? From what, Amanda? From making my own decisions about my own life? From spending my own money on my own priorities? I stood up, feeling stronger and more confident than I had in months. I raised you girls to be independent, strong women. I taught you to work hard, to be responsible with money, to solve your own problems. But instead of applying those lessons to your current difficulties, you've decided to try to solve your problems by controlling mine. The room was silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock Robert and I had bought for our 20th wedding anniversary. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. I am not selling my house. I am not investing in your business ventures. I am not changing my financial management strategy. These decisions are final, and no amount of pressure, manipulation, or legal threats is going to change them. Jessica's eyes filled with tears, but they looked more like tears of frustration than sadness. Mom, we're going to lose everything. Don't you care about what happens to your grandchildren? The attempt to use my grandchildren as emotional leverage was perhaps the most manipulative tactic they had tried yet. Jessica, I love my grandchildren deeply, which is exactly why I'm not going to risk my retirement security on speculative investments. If something happened to my financial stability, I wouldn't be able to help them with college expenses or other needs in the future. But if you helped us now, we could all be financially secure, Amanda argued. The real estate investment really could work. You could double or triple your money. And I could lose everything, I replied. Amanda, the fact that you're in financial trouble because you made risky investments is exactly why I'm not going to make risky investments myself. You're asking me to repeat the same mistakes that got you into this situation. For the first time since this entire ordeal began, both of my daughters seemed to realize that their manipulation tactics weren't working. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped, intimidated, or legally coerced into compliance. I want you both to understand something very clearly, I said, my voice steady and firm. I worked for 42 years to earn the right to make my own decisions about my retirement. I sacrificed. I saved. I planned carefully, and I'm not going to let anyone, including my own children, destroy what I've built. I walked to the front door and opened it. I love you both, but I don't like the people you've become during this process. You've shown me that you value my money more than my autonomy, my assets more than my happiness. Until you can accept that this is my life to live as I choose, I don't think we have anything more to discuss. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Amanda turned back to me one last time. Mom, if you change your mind, I won't, I said firmly. And if you continue to pressure me or involve lawyers in attempts to control my decisions, you'll discover just how strong and determined a retired kindergarten teacher can be when she's fighting for her independence. After they left, I stood in my living room surrounded by the peaceful quiet of my own home. For the first time in months, the silence felt comfortable rather than tense. I had drawn clear boundaries. I had protected my rights. And I had refused to be manipulated by people who claimed to love me while trying to exploit me. The battle wasn't over. I knew that my daughters might continue their efforts to pressure me. But I had won the most important victory. I had maintained my dignity, my independence, and my right to live my retirement on my own terms. That evening, as I sat in my garden watching the sunset, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this ordeal began. Peace. The weeks following. My confrontation with Jessica and Amanda brought an unexpected gift. Silence. No more ambush visits. No more manipulative phone calls. No more certified letters from lawyers. For the first time since retirement began, I could wake up each morning without wondering what new pressure tactic my daughters might deploy. But the silence also brought reflection, and with reflection came a profound realization about the person I had become during 42 years of teaching. In the classroom, I had been a leader, a problem solver, someone who created structure and safety for hundreds of children over the decades. I had been respected by colleagues, trusted by parents, and beloved by students. Yet somehow, when faced With my own family crisis, I had initially responded as a victim rather than drawing on the strength that had defined my professional life. This recognition sparked something powerful within me. If I could guide 5-year-olds through emotional meltdowns, mediate conflicts between strong-willed children, and maintain classroom order during chaos, I certainly had the skills to handle my adult daughter's manipulation. The difference was that I had forgotten to apply my professional confidence to my personal life. My volunteer work at Maplewood Elementary became a source of daily inspiration. Working with struggling readers, I was reminded of the patience required to help someone master a new skill, the importance of celebrating small victories, and the transformative power of believing in someone's potential even when they didn't believe in themselves. One morning, I was working with a 6-year-old named Marcus who had been having difficulty with basic reading comprehension. He was frustrated, convinced he was stupid, and ready to give up on a story about a brave little mouse who overcame obstacles to help his family. "Mrs. Hartwell, I can't do this," Marcus said, pushing the book away. "The words are too hard." I looked at this determined little boy who reminded me so much of the students I had taught over the years, and suddenly I saw a parallel to my own recent experience. "Marcus, can I tell you a secret? Sometimes when things seem really hard, it's not because we can't do them. It's because other people have told us we can't do them, and we started believing it." He looked at me with curious eyes. "What do you mean?" "Well, this little mouse in the story, everyone told him he was too small to help his family, but he didn't listen to them. He listened to his own heart, and he found a way to be brave and strong." I opened the book to the page where this mouse discovers his own courage. Sometimes the people who tell us we can't do something are wrong, even if they're people we love. As Marcus worked through the story with renewed determination, I realized I was giving myself the same lesson. My daughters had tried to convince me I was too old, too naive, too incompetent to manage my own life. But just like Marcus needed to ignore the voices telling him he couldn't read, I needed to ignore the voices telling me I couldn't succeed in retirement on my own terms. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible weeks earlier. I was going to pursue a dream I had harbored for years but never acted upon: writing a children's book. During my teaching career, I had always told myself I was too busy, that I didn't have the expertise, that it was an unrealistic fantasy. But if I could stand up to legal threats and emotional manipulation from my own children, I could certainly handle the challenge of writing and illustrating a story for young readers. I enrolled in a creative writing workshop at the community college, taught by a published author named Chen, no relation to my former principal. The class met every Tuesday evening and included participants ranging from college students to retirees like myself, all united by the desire to tell stories that mattered. My first assignment was to write about a character who discovers hidden strength during a difficult period. The story that emerged was about a grandmother rabbit who must protect her garden and her independence from well-meaning family members who think she's too old to live alone. Writing the story was cathartic, transformative, and surprisingly empowering. Robert read my draft aloud to the class, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. "Eleanor," he said after class, "this story has real potential. Have you considered submitting it to publishers?" The idea that my writing might be good enough for publication was thrilling, but also terrifying. I'm just a retired teacher. I don't know anything about the publishing world. "Neither did any of us when we started," Robert replied. "But you know about children. You understand their emotional needs, and you can write with both warmth and wisdom. Those are exactly the qualifications you need." My watercolor painting classes were equally revelatory. Under the guidance of instructor Sarah Kim, a local artist who had exhibited in galleries throughout the Pacific Northwest, I discovered a talent I never knew I possessed. My paintings began as simple landscapes: the view from my garden, the old oak tree in my backyard, the creek that ran behind my neighborhood. But as my confidence grew, my subjects became more ambitious and more personal. I painted a series called Seasons of Independence, 4 canvases depicting the same garden through different seasons, each representing a different stage of personal growth. Spring showed tentative green shoots pushing through dark soil, representing the beginning of new possibilities. Summer displayed a riot of color and abundance, symbolizing the fullness of life when we embrace our potential. Fall depicted the quiet beauty of leaves changing color, representing the wisdom that comes with accepting change. Winter showed snow-covered branches reaching toward a bright sky, symbolizing the strength and clarity that emerge from surviving difficult seasons. Sarah encouraged me to enter several pieces in the Community Art Center's annual exhibition. Eleanor, your work has an emotional authenticity that speaks to people. These paintings tell stories about resilience and hope that viewers need to see. The idea of displaying my artwork publicly was intimidating, but I remembered the lesson I had taught Marcus about not listening to voices that said we couldn't do something. I submitted 3 paintings from my Seasons of Independence series. Meanwhile, my social circle was expanding in ways that brought daily joy. The book club had introduced me to women who became genuine friends, not just social acquaintances. Catherine, the retired federal judge, became a particular ally and confidant. Her own experience with family members who had questioned her competence gave us a bond built on mutual understanding and respect. Eleanor, Catherine said one evening after our discussion of Where the Crawdads Sing, I want to share something with you. When I first retired, my son and daughter-in-law were convinced I should move to a senior living community. They presented it as being safer and more social, but what they really meant was more controlled and less independent. She sipped her coffee thoughtfully. I spent months doubting myself, wondering if they were right, if I was being stubborn and foolish. But then I realized something important. They were afraid of my independence because it challenged their assumptions about aging and autonomy. My continued capability reminded them that growing older doesn't automatically mean becoming helpless. Catherine's insight resonated deeply. How did you handle it? I stopped trying to prove myself to them and started living for myself. I traveled to countries I'd always wanted to visit. I learned to kayak. I took up photography. I showed them through my actions that I was thriving, not just surviving. She smiled warmly. Eventually, they stopped seeing me as a problem to be managed and started seeing me as an inspiration to be admired. This conversation prompted me to expand my own horizons even further. I had always wanted to travel, but had been cautious about solo trips. Now, I decided to plan a 2-week journey to Ireland, something Robert and I had discussed but never accomplished due to his declining health. The travel planning process was exhilarating. I researched destinations, booked accommodations, and arranged tours that would allow me to explore Irish gardens, historic sites, and literary landmarks. The trip wasn't just about seeing new places. It was about proving to myself that I could navigate the world independently and confidently. But before I could leave for Ireland, I received an unexpected phone call that would test everything. I had learned about standing firm in my convictions. Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Mercy Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter Amanda, who has been admitted following what appears to be a stress-related collapse. She's asking, for you. My heart raced as I drove to the hospital, torn between genuine concern for Amanda's health and wariness about whether this might be another manipulation tactic. When I arrived at her room, I found Amanda looking genuinely unwell, pale, exhausted, and smaller somehow than she had appeared during our recent confrontations. Mom, she said weakly when she saw me. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. I sat down beside her bed, studying her face for signs of deception but seeing only fatigue and what looked like genuine vulnerability. Amanda, what happened? The stress finally caught up with me. David and I lost our house last week. The business is officially bankrupt. We're staying with his parents, and the kids are upset about changing schools mid-semester. Tears began flowing down her cheeks. I haven't been sleeping, I haven't been eating, and I collapsed at work yesterday. The news of their financial collapse was shocking, but what struck me most was Amanda's demeanor. Gone was the aggressive manipulation I had become accustomed to. This was my daughter, scared, defeated, and asking for her mother's comfort rather than her mother's money. "I'm sorry you're going through this, sweetheart. How can I help?" Amanda looked surprised by my offer. "I thought you hated me after everything that happened between us." "I don't hate you, Amanda. I was hurt and angry about the way you tried to manipulate me, but I never stopped loving you." I took her hand, noting how thin she had become. "But I need you to understand that love doesn't mean I'm going to risk my retirement security to fix your financial problems." "I know," she whispered. "I was desperate and scared, and I convinced myself that if you just helped us financially, everything would be okay. But lying here in this hospital bed, I realized that what I really needed was to face our problems honestly and find solutions that didn't involve taking advantage of people I love." For the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to my real daughter rather than someone driven by desperation and greed. "What are you planning to do now?" "David has a job offer in Phoenix. It's a significant pay cut from what he was making, but it's steady income with good benefits. We'll be starting over completely, renting a small apartment, buying used cars, living very modestly until we can rebuild." She managed a weak smile. "It's scary, but it's also honest. We'll be taking responsibility for our own mistakes instead of trying to make them someone else's problem." I felt a surge of pride in my daughter that I hadn't experienced in months. That sounds like the Amanda I raised, brave, hardworking, and willing to do what's necessary to take care of her family. "Mom, I owe you an enormous apology. Not just for trying to pressure you into risky investments, but for trying to make you feel incompetent and dependent. You taught me to be strong and independent, and then I tried to convince you that you were weak and helpless. That was cruel and hypocritical." Amanda's apology felt genuine, but more importantly, it demonstrated that she understood the fundamental wrongness of what she had tried to do. "Amanda, I accept your apology, but I need you to understand that our relationship moving forward will need to be built on mutual respect, not on my compliance with your needs or expectations." "I understand. And Mom? I'm proud of you for standing up to us. It took courage to refuse our demands, especially when we were putting so much pressure on you. You showed us what real strength looks like." 3 days later, Amanda was released from the hospital with a clean bill of health and a prescription for stress management techniques. Before she and David left for Phoenix, she stopped by my house to say goodbye. "Mom, I have something for you," she said, handing me a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photo of the two of us from her college graduation, along with a handwritten letter. The letter read, "Dear Mom, I'm writing this to apologize again and to thank you for teaching me one of the most important lessons of my adult life. By refusing to enable our poor financial decisions, you forced us to find our own solutions and take responsibility for our own mistakes. By standing up for your independence, you showed me what dignity and strength really look like. I'm proud to be your daughter, and I promise that our relationship will be based on love and respect, not on what you can do for us financially. I love you, Amanda." A week later, Jessica called with her own news. Michael had found a new job, not as prestigious or high-paying as his previous position, but stable and sufficient for their family's needs. More importantly, Jessica's tone was entirely different from the aggressive manipulation I had endured months earlier. "Mom, I owe you a huge apology," she began. "Amanda told me about your conversation at the hospital, and it made me realize how badly I had behaved. I was so focused on our financial problems that I lost sight of who you are and what you've accomplished." "Jessica, I appreciate that, but like I told Amanda, Moving forward, our relationship needs to be built on mutual respect. I understand. And Mom? I want you to know that I've learned something important from watching how you handled our pressure. You showed me that being strong doesn't mean never needing help. It means having the courage to make your own decisions and stand by them, even when people you love are trying to convince you otherwise. That evening, as I sat in my garden, reflecting on the dramatic changes of the past few months, I realized that this crisis had transformed not just my relationship with my daughters, but my understanding of myself. I had discovered reserves of strength, confidence, and determination that I had forgotten I possessed. My art exhibition opening was scheduled for the following Friday evening. Sarah had helped me prepare artist statements for each piece, explaining the inspiration and meaning behind my Seasons of Independence series. The Community Art Center had advertised the exhibition in the local newspaper, and I was both excited and nervous about sharing my work with the public. The opening reception exceeded my wildest expectations. The gallery was filled with people from all aspects of my life: former teaching colleagues, book club friends, writing workshop participants, and neighbors I had known for years. My paintings drew crowds of viewers who studied them intently and asked thoughtful questions about my artistic process. The local newspaper's art critic, who attended the opening, later wrote a review that called my work a powerful meditation on resilience and self-discovery in later life, and noted that Eleanor Hartwell's paintings speak to anyone who has ever had to choose between security and growth, between acceptance and courage. Most meaningfully, many viewers shared personal stories about their own experiences with family pressure and the challenge of maintaining independence as they aged. My art had created connections and conversations that went far beyond aesthetic appreciation. It had become a catalyst for discussing important issues about dignity, autonomy, and the right to self-determination. As the evening wound down, Catherine approached me with tears in her eyes. "Eleanor, your paintings tell the story of what it means to claim your power at any age. Thank you for sharing your journey with all of us." Robert Chen from My Writing Workshop also attended the opening. "Eleanor, seeing your visual art makes me even more excited about your children's book manuscript. You're creating stories in multiple mediums about themes that really matter. I think you should seriously consider pursuing publication." 2 weeks later, I boarded a plane to Dublin, Ireland, beginning the solo international trip I had planned as a celebration of my newfound independence. The journey was everything I had hoped for and more, exploring ancient castles, walking through magnificent gardens, attending literary events, and meeting fellow travelers from around the world. But the most powerful moment of the trip came on my final day, as I stood on the cliffs of Moher watching the Atlantic Ocean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. I thought about the woman who had started this journey months earlier, someone who had just retired and was looking forward to quiet, peaceful days of reading and gardening. That woman had been hoping for comfort and security. But the woman, standing on those cliffs, had discovered something far more valuable: the exhilarating freedom that comes from knowing you can handle whatever challenges life presents. The deep satisfaction of living according to your own values and choices, and the profound joy of discovering new capabilities and passions at any age. I pulled out my phone and took a selfie with the dramatic Irish coastline behind me. This photo would go on my refrigerator next to the pictures of my grandchildren, not because I was trying to prove anything to anyone, but because I wanted to remember this moment when I fully understood that retirement wasn't the end of growth and adventure. It was the beginning of the most authentic, empowered chapter of my life. When I returned to Cedar Falls, I found a message on my answering machine that made me smile. It was from a small publishing house in Portland that had received my children's book manuscript from Robert Chen. They were interested in discussing publication and wanted to schedule a meeting. That evening, as I sat in my garden surrounded by the roses Robert and I had planted together, I felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the specific victories I had achieved, but for the person I had become through the process of fighting for my independence. My daughter's attempt to control my life had inadvertently given me the greatest gift imaginable: the rediscovery of my own strength, creativity, and unlimited potential. The story wasn't over, it was just beginning. And for the first time since retirement started, I couldn't wait to see what tomorrow would bring. The meeting with Wildflower Books, the Portland publishing house, took place on a crisp October morning 6 months after my return from Ireland. Their offices occupied a converted Victorian house in the Pearl District, with exposed brick walls lined with children's books and artwork from their published illustrators. I had spent weeks preparing for this meeting, refining my manuscript, and creating sample illustrations using the watercolor techniques I had learned. Sarah Goldstein, the editor-in-chief, greeted me with genuine enthusiasm. "Mrs. Hartwell, Robert Chen shared your manuscript with us because he believed it addressed themes that are often overlooked in children's literature: resilience, self-advocacy, and the importance of trusting your own judgment even when others doubt you." She led me to a conference room where 3 other staff members were waiting, including Marcus Rivera, their head illustrator, and Janet Wong, their marketing director. The walls were covered with artwork from their recent publications, and I felt both intimidated and exhilarated to be in this creative environment. "Your story about Rosie the rabbit resonated with all of us," Sarah continued, opening a folder containing my manuscript. "The way Rosie learns to protect her garden and her independence from well-meaning family members who want to help her reflects experiences that many children have with adults who don't take their autonomy seriously." "Though?" Marcus leaned forward, studying the watercolor illustrations I had created. "These paintings are exceptional, Mrs. Hartwell. The way you've used color to show Rosie's emotional journey, from the muted tones when she's feeling pressured to the vibrant hues when she reclaims her confidence. It's sophisticated storytelling through art." The conversation that followed was unlike anything I had ever experienced. These publishing professionals weren't just being polite, they were genuinely excited about my work and had specific ideas about how to bring it to market. Sarah explained their process: professional editing to refine the text, collaboration with their design team to optimize the illustrations, and a marketing campaign that would include bookstore events and school visits. "Mrs. Hartwell, we'd like to offer you a publishing contract," Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table. "This would be your first book, but we believe it has the potential to reach a wide audience and possibly become the foundation for a series." The idea that my story could become a series was overwhelming. A series? Children's books about characters who face challenges and discover their own strength are always popular, Janet explained. Rosie could encounter different situations where she needs to trust her own judgment and stand up for herself. You've created a character that children can relate to and learn from. Leaving the meeting with a signed publishing contract felt surreal. At 66 years old, I was officially becoming a published author. The woman who had been told by her own daughters that she was too naive to manage her own finances was now being paid to share stories about wisdom and independence with children across the country. But even more meaningful than the professional validation was the personal growth the writing process had catalyzed. Creating Rosie's story had helped me process my own experience with family manipulation and had given me a framework for understanding the importance of self-advocacy at any age. That afternoon, I called my sister Margaret to share the news. "Ellie, I am so proud of you," she exclaimed. "Do you realize what you've accomplished? A year ago, you were being pressured to sell your house and questioning your own judgment. Now you're a published author with artwork hanging in galleries. You've completely transformed your life." Margaret's perspective helped me appreciate the magnitude of the changes I had made. But what struck me most was that these transformations hadn't happened despite the crisis with my daughters. They had happened because of it. Their attempts to control my life had forced me to rediscover my own strength and pursue dreams I had been postponing for decades. My volunteer work at Maplewood Elementary had evolved into something much more significant than I had originally planned. Mrs. Chen had asked me to develop a new program called Reading Champions, designed to help struggling students build both literacy, skills, and confidence. The program paired older students with younger ones, creating mentorship relationships that benefited both age groups. Working with these children reminded me daily of the importance of believing in people's potential, especially when they didn't believe in themselves. 8-year-old Maya, who had initially refused to read aloud because she was afraid of making mistakes, was now leading story time for the kindergarten classes. 12-year-old Jason, who had been labeled as having behavioral problems, had become one of our most patient and effective tutors for younger children. "Mrs. Hartwell," Maya said one afternoon after successfully reading a chapter book to a group of fascinated 5-year-olds, "you taught me that making mistakes doesn't mean I'm stupid. It just means I'm learning." These moments with students were profound reminders that age was irrelevant when it came to growth and learning. If 8-year-old Maya could overcome her fear of making mistakes and discover her leadership abilities, surely I could continue challenging myself to pursue new dreams and possibilities. The success of my art exhibition had led to unexpected opportunities. The Community Art Center invited me to teach a workshop called Art as Personal Narrative, designed for people who wanted to use creative expression to process life experiences. The workshop attracted participants ranging from recent college graduates dealing with career uncertainty to seniors navigating retirement transitions. One of my students was Robert Martinez, a recently divorced man in his 50s who was struggling to rebuild his identity after his marriage ended. "Eleanor," he said during our third session, "I've never considered myself artistic, but painting has helped me understand my emotions in ways that talking to therapists never did." Another participant was Jennifer Chen, a 30-something mother, who was dealing with pressure from her extended family about her parenting choices. "Your story about standing up to family manipulation gave me the courage to set boundaries with my in-laws," she told me. "If you could face down lawyers and threats at 65, I can certainly handle some disapproving comments about my decision to work part-time." Teaching these workshops reinforced something I had learned from my own experience. Creativity wasn't just about producing art. It was about developing the confidence to trust your own perspective and express your authentic truth, regardless of other people's opinions or expectations. My relationship with Jessica and Amanda had stabilized into something healthier than it had been before the crisis. Amanda called regularly from Phoenix, sharing updates about her family's adjustment to their new life. Their financial situation was improving slowly, and more importantly, she and David were working as a team to rebuild rather than looking for external solutions to their problems. "Mom, I want to tell you something," Amanda said during one of our weekly calls. "Living within our means, taking responsibility for our mistakes, making decisions based on what we can afford rather than what we want, it's actually brought David and me closer together. We're a stronger family now than we were when we had more money but less honesty." Jessica had taken a different approach to rebuilding her life. Instead of moving, she and Michael had downsized their lifestyle significantly, selling their large suburban home and moving to a smaller house in a more affordable neighborhood. Jessica had also started a consulting business, using her marketing expertise to help small businesses develop their brand strategies. "The funny thing is, I'm happier now than I was when I was making more money," Jessica told me. "I have more control over my work, I'm home more with the kids, and I'm not constantly stressed about maintaining a lifestyle we couldn't really afford." Both daughters had learned valuable lessons from their financial crisis, but perhaps more importantly, they had learned to respect my autonomy and decision-making abilities. Our conversations now focused on their lives, my projects, and family news rather than on their concerns about my competence or their suggestions for my life management. The publication process for Rosie's Garden took 8 months, during which I worked closely with the editorial team to refine both the text and illustrations. The experience was like taking an intensive course in professional writing and publishing, and I found myself growing as both an artist and a storyteller. Sarah Goldstein proved to be an exceptional editor, helping me strengthen the narrative while maintaining the authentic voice that had originally attracted their interest. Eleanor, your background as a teacher gives you an intuitive understanding of how children process information and emotions, she explained during one of our editing sessions. We want to preserve that authenticity while making sure the story structure is as strong as possible. Marcus Rivera worked with me to develop a consistent visual style for the illustrations, teaching me techniques for creating artwork that would reproduce well in print while maintaining the emotional impact of the original paintings. Your use of color to represent emotional states is sophisticated, he told me. We want to make sure that subtlety comes through in the final book. 6 weeks before the book's scheduled release, Wildflower Books organized a launch event at Powell's Books, Portland's legendary independent bookstore. The idea of reading my story aloud to an audience of strangers was terrifying, but it was also the culmination of everything I had worked toward over the past year. Margaret flew in from Phoenix for the event, along with several friends from my book club and art classes. Even Mrs. Chen and some of my former teaching colleagues made the drive to Portland to support me. Standing in Powell's children's section, surrounded by people who had encouraged my creative journey, I felt overwhelmed, with gratitude for the community I had built around my new pursuits. The reading went better than I had dared to hope. The audience, a mixture of children, parents, teachers, and librarians, listened attentively as I shared Rosie's story of learning to trust her own judgment and protect her independence. During the question and answer session, several teachers mentioned that they planned to use the book in their classrooms to discuss themes of self-advocacy and resilience. One question particularly moved me. A 10-year-old girl named Sophie asked, "Mrs. Hartwell, was it scary for Rosie to stand up to her family when they wanted her to do things she didn't want to do?" "Yes, Sophie, it was very scary," I replied. But Rosie learned something important. Being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust yourself, even when people you love are telling you that you're wrong. After the event, as I signed books for readers who wanted personalized copies, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. A year earlier, I had been a newly retired teacher being pressured by my daughters to sell my house and change my entire life. Now I was a published author, an artist with gallery exhibitions, and a workshop leader helping others find their creative voices. But the most significant transformation wasn't professional, it was personal. I had rediscovered the confidence and determination that had made me an effective teacher for 4 decades. I had learned that retirement didn't mean retreating from challenges or accepting other people's limitations. It meant having the freedom to pursue dreams and possibilities that work and family obligations had previously made impossible. 2. Months after the book launch, I received a letter that brought this realization into sharp focus. It was from a reader named Catherine Williams, a grandmother in Seattle who had read Rosie's Garden to her 7-year-old granddaughter. "Dear Mrs. Hartwell," the letter began, "thank you for writing a book that helped my granddaughter understand why I didn't want to move to a senior living facility when my son suggested it last year. After we read Rosie's story, Emma told me, 'Grandma, you're like Rosie. You know what's best for your own garden.' Your book gave us a way to talk about independence and self-determination that a 7-year-old could understand and support." Catherine went on to explain that she had been feeling pressured by her adult children to make living arrangements that would make them feel more comfortable, but would compromise her own autonomy. Reading about Rosie's courage to protect her garden reminded me that I have the right to protect my own independence, even if my children don't understand or approve of my choices. This letter, and dozens of others like it, confirmed that Rosie's Garden was reaching readers who needed its message of empowerment and self-advocacy. But more than that, it reminded me that my personal experience with family manipulation had universal relevance. By transforming my struggle into art and storytelling, I had created something that could help others facing similar challenges. My second book in the Rosie series, Rosie's Adventure, was already in development. This story would follow Rosie as she decides to take a solo trip to explore new gardens, despite family members who think she's too old for such adventures. The parallel to my own journey to Ireland was intentional. I wanted children to understand that curiosity, courage, and the desire for new experiences shouldn't diminish with age. As winter settled over Cedar Falls, I found myself more energized and purposeful than I had felt in decades. My days were filled with activities I had chosen: writing and illustrating new stories, teaching art workshops, volunteering with struggling readers, and maintaining the friendships and creative pursuits that brought me joy. The house that my daughters had wanted me to sell had become the creative headquarters for my new life. My spare bedroom was now an art studio, filled with easels, paints, and canvases. The dining room table that had once been used only for family gatherings was now covered with manuscript pages, illustration sketches, and correspondence with publishers and readers. Most importantly, the silence that had once felt lonely after Robert's death was now filled with the satisfying sounds of creative work: the scratch of pencil on paper, the gentle splash of watercolor on canvas, the click of computer keys as I worked on new stories. One evening, as I was putting finishing touches on an illustration for Rosie's adventure, the phone rang. It was Amanda, calling from Phoenix with exciting news. "Mom, I have something wonderful to tell you. David got a promotion, and we've saved enough money to buy a small house. It's nothing fancy, but it's ours, and we've built it through our own hard work and responsible decisions." Amanda, I'm so proud of you both. You've rebuilt your lives on a solid foundation. More than that, Mom, we've rebuilt our marriage and our family relationships on honesty and mutual respect. The kids are happier too, because they're not living with the stress of parents who were constantly worried about money and making poor decisions to try to maintain an unsustainable lifestyle. After we hung up, I realized that my daughters had learned the same lesson I had learned, just from a different direction. They had discovered that true security came not from external resources or other people's money, but from developing the skills, confidence, and integrity to handle whatever challenges life presented. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked out my bedroom window at the garden Robert and I had planted together. The roses were dormant for winter, but I could see the strong root systems and sturdy canes that would produce beautiful blooms in the spring. This garden, like my own life, had survived storms, periods of neglect, and threats of destruction. But with proper care, patience, and the courage to prune away what was unhealthy, it continued to flourish and produce beauty. I had spent months learning to protect my independence like Rosie protected her garden. But now I understood that independence wasn't just about resistance, it was about cultivation. It was about nurturing the dreams, relationships, and possibilities that made life meaningful, regardless of what other people thought you should or shouldn't do at any particular age. Tomorrow would bring new writing projects, new art students, new reading challenges to help children overcome, and new adventures to plan. At 66, I was just beginning to understand the unlimited potential that retirement could offer when it was lived with courage, creativity, and the determination to write your own story, rather than accepting the limitations others tried to impose. The woman who had once worried about being a burden to her children had become an inspiration to readers, students, and fellow artists. The retirement that had started with manipulation and crisis had become a testament to the power of standing up for yourself and pursuing your dreams at any age. This was my garden now, beautiful, productive, and entirely my own to cultivate. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.